Now, if you don't know how to play against the Scandinavian defense, or you might having some problems from some of its modern variations, then you came at the right place, because in today's video I'm going to show you how to get an advantageous position against most of the Scandinavian defense lines. Now, the line which I'm going to recommend in this video are played, adopted and favored by some of the world's top grandmasters. And the good thing from the white perspective is, against all the Scandinavian defense move orders, our plan of campaign are pretty much similar. So join with me and learn how to defuse the Scandinavian defense. Now, after white plays e4, Scandinavian defense move order start with the move d5, and here I recommend you should certainly capture this pawn. And here you can see I have highlighted by the arrows, black has a few options, but among those the only two options which are good are knight to f6 and queen cross d5. But before going into the main moves, let's deal some of the gambit ideas by black. So first move is black can try this tricky gambit, which is e6. Well, against this white has a very fantastic reply, which is bishop to b5 check. And now you can see black has two good options over here. If black plays c6, then the very simple will be d cross c6, and after, let's say, pawn captures or the knight captures. Let's say in one of my game my opponent captured with the knight, but after I played knight to f3, you can see not only white is a clear pawn up, but white is not also lagging behind in development. In the next move, white will castle on the king side, and in the whole game white will remain a pawn up. So I don't understand what logic behind giving up the pawn like this. So that is c6. Now the most logical reply looks like bishop to d7, but here there is a nasty trap exists for the white, so please watch out for this one. And here white has a cunning move, which is d cross e6. If the f cross e6, then the black pawn structure will be ragged. So the most logical reply looks like bishop cross bishop, but afterwards white has a very simple reply, which is e cross f7, and after king cross f7, white has this lethal check which will regain the piece. And please note, at this position white will be a clear 2 pawns up, as well as black has lost the castle right. That is about e6. Now here black can also try another gambit idea, which is the c6 move. Here white should certainly capture this pawn, and after knight to c6, my simple recommendation is you just carry out your normal piece development. So for example, you can play knight to f3. Against one of my game, my opponent responded with bishop to f5. Afterwards I played bishop to c4, and after e6 I played knight to c3, and some of the moves are like this. So he played knight to f6, I played castle on the king side, and after bishop to c5 I simply played d3, and after he castle on the king side I played bishop to f4. What's going on? Nothing special. Both sides are pretty much equal. The only drawback black is having is he is a clear pawn down, and if you play accurately from here onwards, you can easily convert this sort of games into the winning game. So that is about e6 and c6. Let's start with some of the main moves of the Scandinavian defense, and the first move I want to consider is knight to f6, which is known as modern Scandinavian defense. Here there are few tricks and traps exist which you need to watch out. If you meet this position first time, then you are likely to play this move, which is c4. It looks very logical because it's protecting the pawn, and what's wrong with this? But the idea is now black can launch a vicious gambits, and that can be proved very, very dangerous. For example, black can try e6, which is known as Icelandic gambit, and now if white capture this pawn, black will certainly recapture with the bishop, and I certainly believe that black has enough compensation for one pawn, because it has a tremendous piece development, and there are some nasty theories exist for these lines. So altogether I'm suggesting you that you completely avoid this. Also, there is a second gambit idea, which is the c6, and here also if you capture this pawn, black will capture with the knight, and again black has a tremendous piece development. So please avoid all this nonsense. Also, if you play here the simple looking move d4, then black can try another tricky move, which is bishop to g4, and this is known as Jadul Gambit, and there is a long theory exists for this line. So rather facing these sorts of variations where black knows their stuff very well and white is fighting for the initiative, what I recommend here is you follow the simple step which I am going to recommend in this video, which start with the move bishop to e2. Now bishop to e2 has a simple idea. First of all, it's stopping bishop to g4, and after knight cross d5, you stop that knight coming to the f4 by playing d4. And let me reveal the white structure at this point. So what white is aiming for in the most of the scenario is white will play knight to f3 followed by castle on the king side, and then drive this knight with the move c4. Let's say this knight go to the b6, and now this bishop can go to either e3, f4 or g5 depending on the circumstances. The most active square for this bishop is f4, and afterwards this knight has two wonderful squares. Now if the position is free, then I certainly recommend that you play knight to c3, and afterwards you can see the plan of campaign from the white is very simple. So white has two plans now. So first plan I have highlighted by the arrows over here. White can look forward for the a3 and b4 move and gain space on the queen side. And the another plan which is very effective in the most of the scenario is you play queen to d2. These two rooks can be aggressively placed either on c1, d1 or e1, and then white can look forward for the central breaks. These are two very effective plans by the white, and please note white has a tremendous space advantage because of this c4 and d4 moves. So this is the pretty much plan of the white if black does not do anything and sit passively. Now what I'm going to do in this lecture is I'm going to show you the lines where white is having problem to carry out these plans. In the rest of the scenario, you should certainly follow the plan which I have recommended. The first system which is designed to confuse the white plan is start with this move, which is g6. So now the idea is very simple. Black wants to play bishop to g7 and castle on the queen side. Here I recommend that instead of normal knight to f3, you immediately kick that knight, and after knight go to the b6, now you play knight to c3. The simple reason is when black plays bishop to g7, which has a merit of attacking that pawn, white has a wonderful forcing lines which start with the move c5. Knight to d7 is a bit passive, so most of the time your opponent is going to play knight to d5, and here you play bishop to c4. And now you can see two pieces are attacking the knight, and if your opponent plays e6, then that will lock up that bishop, and if your opponent plays c6, then that will take the wonderful square from this knight. So that's why black has to forcefully capture this knight. Now before we look at knight cross c3, let's see what will happen if your opponent tries either of this move. So in one of my game, my opponent plays c6 and I responded with knight to f3, and here he pinned this knight with bishop to g4. I played a very cunning move, which is queen to b3, and queen to b3 is attacking two spots, so b7 as well as the knight. So my opponent first of all captured this knight, and after I recapture, he played bishop cross d4, which is a kind of mistake because then I simply capture that knight, and after black recapture, I simply capture that pawn with my bishop. And now you can see this two queen and bishop battery is not only attacking the f7, but it's also attacking the b7, and black cannot defend both the threat. So in the game my opponent played castle on the king side, but afterwards I simply captured the b7 with the queen. My opponent responded with knight to d7. Afterwards I simply captured that rook, and after queen captures, bishop recaptures, rook captures, I simply played bishop to e3. As far as I can see, white is a clear exchange up, and in the game I easily managed to win. So that game will give you an idea what kind of disaster can loom if black plays c6. The best option here for the black will be to capture this knight, but afterwards white will recapture with the b pawn, and now you can see by capturing this way we have blunted the diagonal of this bishop. So most of the time your opponent is going to castle on the king side, and now you carried out your normal pace development. So you play knight to f3, and if your opponent plays bishop to g4, then I recommend you just nab the bishop pair by playing h3. And after bishop captures, queen captures. This is the case of one of my game, and here my opponent responded with c6, and I simply played rook to b1. So once again renewing the threat of capturing that pawn. And the good thing is queen cannot come to c7 because it can be attacked one more time with bishop to f4. So in the game my opponent responded with queen to c8. Afterwards I simply castle on the king side, and you can see white position is already very good and black pieces are very passive. Let's see how the game progressed. So my opponent plays knight to d7. Afterwards I played rook to e1, so attacking the e pawn, and here my opponent responded with bishop to f6, which is a kind of small mistake that allows me to play bishop to h6 attacking the rook, and after rook to e8 I simply played h4. And you can see the plan of campaign from the white is very easy. All I want to play is h5, weaken the black king, and then go for the attack. Here my opponent knows that h5 is coming, and somehow he was frustrated about his position, so he played this hilarious move, which is e5. This is outright mistake because now I simply capture that pawn. Generally you won't capture this sort of things because that will give you an isolated double c pawns, but this is a completely favorable position. That's why I recapture that pawn. And here my opponent capture with the rook, which will simplify more because I capture that rook, and after bishop captures I simply give this check, and my opponent played king to h8. That's the only move left. Afterwards pressurize more with rook to e1, and now you can see my simple plan is to capture this knight and then give a checkmate to the black king. So my opponent decided to defend with bishop to f6. Bishop to f6 not only protect the critical g7, but it's also preventing the rook coming to the e7. But